Today we're going to learn how to make an ambient occlusion pass in Maya. And even if you don't know what that is, if you do a quick Google search, you'll see some patterns emerge really quickly. And what you're reading is the ambient light in a scene. So this doesn't have a bunch of different textures in it. This really is just putting one texture over everything and changing the value based on the amount of ambient light in the scene, hence ambient occlusion. And it can be used to combine with other render passes. So you might have something like your diffuse only, you get your ambient pass and then you combine it. It's showing a lot of the detail of the objects and how the shadow would hit it. So how do we do this? Well, you can use it for any scene, but I started with a simple one. I made a box, I made a sphere, and a plane, and I just put 3 different Arnold textures on it. Once again, I just went to our standard surface, and to make it easy for everyone, I picked our standard surface and just picked a couple presets. I specifically used plastic, ceramic, and gold, but you can choose any of the ones you want. And then I just put one on each object. And so when I render it, you'll see the end result here. Hopefully I turned that off. There we go. And you'll see this image where it has some range in it, it has some shadows, but you're really not seeing them pop, right? This is a pretty flat shadow. You have a little more emerging over here, but even then we're not getting a lot of detail. We're getting a lot of kind of specular noise, and it's not really dynamic. It doesn't have a ton of volume to it. So I can escape. Now I could just go ahead and put an ambient occlusion texture on this and hope that my renders match. But if I accidentally zoom in or out, I kind of doomed myself a little. To make sure that we don't have to worry about if we spin around, if we change our angle, if we accidentally hit our mouse, we're going to actually set up this. In Render Setup, you can actually set up rendering layers. And here's what we're going to make today. I have a rendering layer that I can turn on or off. And if you notice right back here, we'll see that change. And that's my ambient occlusion pass. If I render that, it's what you saw before. It's going to render a little quicker because it doesn't have quite as much color information, and you'll see the shadows are much more dynamic on this. And I could play around with my render quality to make that even better if I wanted. So how do I set this up? Well, I'm going to go ahead and delete this and get rid of it all so we can do it from scratch. So the first thing I want to do is hit this Create a Render Layer. You can leave whatever name if you want. It's just going to be Render Layer 1. And then from there, I right-click and I create a collection. And what this does, even though it's a little daunting, it tells you what to do. Drag nodes here using the outliner or select from the viewport. So if I don't have my outliner here, I can go ahead and hit this button. I can also go to Window, and outliner is right there. Either way, you want that menu open and you're just going to click on them. Ambient occlusion does not go on the light, it just goes on the objects. Come on, you can do it. Middle mouse button. You can laugh at my struggles if you want. And we have them all. So these are the objects that are going to be affected, and you do not have to write an expression. To apply the ambient occlusion material on, you can right-click and go ahead and either add a material override or a shader override. I'm going to use a shader override, and then I click right here on these checkers, and all I have to do is search ambient occlusion, as you saw I did earlier, or ambient. And if I toggle this eyeball on and off, you'll see the ambient occlusion go on and off. So what I want everyone to do is go ahead and render 2 passes. Now, if you're getting a lot of noise on this render, remember, you can always go to your rendering menu, or you can click this little icon with the clapboard and the settings. It's to the left of your hypershade. Go into the Arnold render setting and go ahead and bump this up. I'm probably getting a little issue of diffuse. I'm probably getting a little specular. I'm not really getting transmission because nothing is going through. And I don't think my indirect volume is too high either. So I'm going to just try changing these. So shouldn't have a subsurface scattering issue either. I don't think anything is really going under very much. And then let me go ahead and render this, and we'll see how that turns out. Oh, actually, so I lied to you. I forgot there's plastic in here, so I do want to keep that subsurface scattering maybe to 2 or 3. There's probably a little bit of transmission, but not too much, so now I can render it. There we go, that's better. I'm not getting as much noise on the plastic. So sorry, there was some subsurface scattering. And I will admit, a lot of this is I pick the first number set that I think will work, and then if it doesn't, I stop, I see where I'm getting my noise speckles. If it's happening a lot on the top of this plastic, it's probably diffuse and subsurface scattering. And if it's some of the other objects, like how it's shining, I would think this might be more specular. Once it renders, go ahead and do that File, Save Image. Save it to where your project is set. I'm just going to call this Material, I guess, Standard Pass. And then I'm going to render it again by making sure I turn on this render layer. And that will give me my ambient occlusion pass. So once this is done, we'll go ahead and put both images into Photoshop. It's pretty easy, right? And I'll call this AO Pass. In fact, whenever you see AO Pass, it normally stands for ambient occlusion, unless someone has a very different naming scheme. And then from there, we can open up Photoshop. If you need to wait until Photoshop opens, go ahead and pause the video until then. And then after that, you want to go ahead and do a File, Open for one of your passes. If you want to open both at the same time, you can. We can just copy and paste from one document to the other. And there we go. There's our AO pass and our standard pass. Now, if I want, I can do a Control A or Select All and a copy and just paste that over this other one. And then from there, I will get 2 layers. What I want to do from there is click on my first layer, and I can select these different blending options, and I can see really which one kind of looks better. So I think automatically that one's definitely popping out a little more with the multiply. I like the linear burn, that gives me darker shadows. And if there's one that you don't love, these are the fun inverted ones. But I'm going to go to a linear burn, and if I decided that just made my gold a little too dull, from there, I could go to the opacity and just turn that opacity layer down a little. And what that will do is turn the opacity of my ambient occlusion down. And so if we were to go ahead and turn this one on and off, I think you can see how much that ambient occlusion pass will go ahead and affect the volume and make that really pop a lot more. So that's why we use it. So go ahead and play around with the settings. Then once you have something that you like, you can do a Save As. Go ahead and save to your computer unless you really like using your cloud. And if you want to change it later, save a PSD. But I would like you to turn in either a PNG or a JPEG. And there we go. Now you're done the ambient occlusion pass. Congratulations!